Hey, it's Steve Riley. Welcome back to Great Practice, Great Life. Today, I bring back a colleague, a friend, a fellow brother of the bar, and someone who is bringing a very unique and powerful message to us all, regardless of where we're at in life. So today, I welcome back Ron Chapman. Ron, welcome to the show.
Steve, it's great to see you. Thank you for having me back.
It's great to have you back. And I just want to kind of set the stage. I'm going to put in the show notes a link to our prior podcast together where you talk a little bit, well, not a little bit, a lot about how you built a unique brand, your story about going from becoming a JAG officer and going from a JAG officer into private practice and how you built a practice and how you built a national niche. So it's a fantastic story about how you think and how you grow. But today, I just want to spend a minute to talk about who you are, and then we're going to talk about your new book, Truth and Persuasion in the Digital Revolution, because I think it's a fantastic book and one that's important at this time for our listeners to at least be aware of and look at. So let's just spend a couple minutes because talk about your career as a JAG officer and how you transitioned, what you do now. And I know you spend a lot of times on planes going between trials, but let's just spend a minute and talk to me about your past and how you ended up where you're at, just a couple of minutes.
My kids grew up looking at airplanes in the sky. We live in Detroit, and Detroit Metro is not too far outside the city. And when they were with their mom in the car and they saw an airplane in the sky, they would always ask if that's dad. That's that's how often I was on an airplane, especially early on in my career, because as you're in the process of building something like this, you have to go. You have to be ready to go and do anything. And of course, the Marine Corps taught me, pack your bag, keep it ready, and when you've got to go do something, you got to get to it. That's the mentality that I brought into my early practice, and I don't regret that at all. But the book, and I'm going to talk about my career, but the book really comes out of the lessons that I've learned from pursuing that lifestyle for too long and feeling a significant amount of burnout as a result of it. So when you're young and it's early, you can do that work. But then at some point, and I think you might have even referenced exactly the point at which it happens to me or to people during the last show. But at some point, you really start to feel the toll and you really start to have to take a hard look at yourself and say, how can I do things differently? So just to bring everybody through my career, didn't want to be a lawyer. My dad was a lawyer, and so that's the opposite of what I wanted to be. Of course, I carried the briefcase through many courthouses, and I remember one story involving my dad where I always looked up to him. He was a fighter, well known. I saw him on the news, and I just always had a tremendous sense of pride, although I didn't get a lot of time with him. But at one point, when I was in my teens, I went to court with him, and he had his assistant, maybe a paralegal, pack all these boxes on a cart and wheel them into the courtroom. That was the day that was set for trial. They unpack all of the evidence. The parties go into some meeting room that I'm not allowed into. I think I was helping pack the boxes. And then they come out of the meeting room. The case is settled. The settlement is put on the record and everything works out. And I said, hey, Dad, why did we get ready for trial if there was going to be this settlement discussion? And this is when I learned maybe one of the most important lessons of my life. And he said, listen, so many people in this world pretend that they never have to fight. And they spend most of their time avoiding getting into the fight. And when you show people that you are 100% ready and willing to fight for what you need to fight for, you find that a lot more gates open up, right? That has informed my entire trial strategy, how I approach cases. We get ready for trial first. Those boxes of evidence weren't needed that day. Maybe many of them didn't even have evidence in them. This was back in the 90s when you probably could play a trick like that because the flash drive is not as imposing, right? But that was the lesson that I learned. And so from then on, everything else I pursued in life was really with an eye towards the ultimate conclusion of things. And I felt like I had purpose and I was able to drive towards it. But that being said, didn't really want to be a trial lawyer. 9/11 hit, and I found myself in college. It was my freshman year, and I went into the recruiter's office the next day, because that was the fight now. That was the big challenge for the country. George Bush getting on top of that car, or whatever it was, outside of the Twin Towers that had just been down, delivered a pretty motivating speech. And I thought, well, if this country has to fight for its survival, I'm certainly going to be on the front lines of it. And I pursued that, but quickly realizing, because of Professor Mark Rigstad that I wrote a dedication of the book to, that my talents weren't just towards picking up a rifle and moving forward, but really the philosophical part of what we have to do as a country and what we have to endure. So there was a bit of maturing that happened during my time pursuing being an officer in the Marine Corps, where I realized that there are a lot of people who are willing to run forward with a weapon. There are a lot of people who are willing to maybe spread hatred. There are a lot of people who are willing to just blindly engage in hysteria. But there's not a lot of people who have the brain to put restraint on that sort of conduct and make sure that reason is applied to ensure that we're moving in the right direction. And that's the role of the judge advocate in a Marine Corps battalion. And that's the role that I played. A bit of a contrarian role, a bit of a let's exercise some restraint. And through that process, I learned to stand up for what I believe in, protect the Geneva Convention, human rights, even when it involved detainees, and to avoid making very large mistakes on the battlefield out of emotion or passion, which is exactly what I bring to the law now. When we see hysteria, we should always question ourselves. And that's really the fundamental nature of what I've been doing.
Well, you are a litigator, a JAG veteran, a Marine through and through, a strategist in the courtroom. You have a great reputation as a trial lawyer. Not a good one, but a great one.
Thank you.
And then you open up and start to explore what truth means and what persuasion means in this really interesting, complex, and fun, phenomenal book. So why did you write the book? What was going on?
This book started as a book about cross-examination. I had just finished a case, United States versus Hansen. We got a doctor acquitted of every single count. They accused him of killing, I believe it was 11 patients total. On the witness stand, the chief medical examiner for Kentucky gets on and testifies that these deaths were all related to drugs because drugs were found in the system. It was very circular to me. I think this man had like 3,000 autopsies or more under his belt, knew what he was doing, very intimidating person. But I realized in preparing for his cross-examination that a lot of this was a mask. A lot of what he was projecting was a mask. I'm a great medical examiner. I have a lot of autopsies under my belt. I know exactly what I'm doing. And he's gotten on witness stands across the country to send this message. But I realized that he was doing something very sloppy. He was assuming that because somebody had drugs in their system, the drugs caused the death. It's a causation issue. And when you really pull back the curtain and find out why he would make such a mistake, we realized the true story that was going on with that witness. And the reality was he wanted to be a good medical examiner, but the office was hurting for funding. He wanted to do full autopsies on people, but the office couldn't afford it. So people tend to justify what they do, mask it with truth, so that they can engage in the kind of drug dealing that happens in our mind when we have to bend the truth a little and get on a witness stand and say things like this. So he says, well, I can't get all of this done, so I'm going to do my best. And my best is I'm just going to make this policy that when there's fentanyl, opiates, whatever in a system of a patient, we will call that a drug death. And his justification was that they would get a lot of federal government dollars because drug deaths skyrocketed in Kentucky, particularly because of his conduct. So he ends justifies the means sort of thinking. I started to write the book on cross-examination, and then I realized that that missed the point. That the point isn't how you cross-examine a witness to uncover this. The point that needs to be made is really one about truth. His personal truth and how it eroded, the mask that he was wearing, because if we can uncover that mask from ourselves, but also from a witness, and really get into the heart of what makes them tick, you can pierce that immediately. So I opened up in the cross-examination with a tease. Hey, in 2011, you decided to resign from the Kentucky Medical Examiner's Office because of budgeting constraints. I did. Then you just came back, but the budget didn't change. That's right. Let that sit. Cross examine him. Then by the end of it, loop right back into the budgeting constraints. You were able to resolve these budgeting constraints by changing your methodology of how you determine drug induced deaths. He didn't answer the question, but it didn't matter. At that point, the jury was just done with him completely. And so that's how we can dive into life. That's how we can dive into cross examining witnesses. That's how we can dive into the media that we're consuming by really figuring that out and understanding what their narrative is, and then having a conversation with that narrative.
Who do you think this book, this conversation is relevant for? Why do you think someone should take the time to work? And there's work. And I enjoyed the book, by the way, but there's work in this book. There's work in this book. You challenge how people think, you challenge their narrative, you challenge a lot of things, and you bring a lot of psychology, philosophy, cultural references, examples. You talk about the OJ trial, you talk about the Johnny Depp trial. Who did you write this book for?
That is one of the hardest questions to answer, because the book is really a collection of a lot of the lessons that I've learned that helps us understand the way that we should start processing information and the way that we can start having real conversations with people. I give the 10 rules of postmodern persuasion at the end. The book really is for anybody who would benefit from those. Whether you are in the business world seeking to have a better meeting and satisfy your client's needs, whether you're a lawyer who's about to get up and cross examine a witness, whether you're a parent and you want to understand a little bit more about your children, about how the digital world is impacting them, whether you have wanted to be a social media influencer and are finding that that is just such an empty feeling, and especially if you are getting tired of the modern capitalist consumer culture being an endless treadmill that simply speeds up over and over again, this book is really for you. It really, everybody can get something out of it. Um, but you will only get something out of it if you start to apply what you're seeing in there and looking at the world in a completely different way and changing some of the things that you do. You just mentioned before the show that you have radically changed your media diet. I think you did in 2018. That's something that we cover in the book, right? The influencers, the marketing that is used, a lot of the um, system one, system two thinking that is appealed to. And I suspect, I don't want to be too presumptuous, but I suspect that one reason that you changed your media diet is because you got really exhausted with the type one messaging that was going on, and you are a type two thinker. You are somebody who likes to process and analyze the right way, and those constant signals that are coming at you are exhausting.
Well, let's talk about, explain to the audience what type 1 and type 2 thinking is for someone who has no idea what you're referencing for a moment.
Absolutely. So this book really is a 30,000 foot, very very high speed view of a lot of different concepts that need to be understood. And my hope is to be able to explore these all individually later and in smaller books or maybe even larger works. But a part of this book is about Daniel Kahneman and behavioral economics. A lot of people have become familiar with that through the series Freakonomics. Malcolm Gladwell talks a lot about it. Daniel Kahneman has put out a couple of books, but I take a chapter and really discuss that for the people who need an introduction and then give them some of the materials that they can review later on. But system one thinking is, well, I'll tell a story that I think I highlight in the book. You're driving down the highway, you're hungry. Maybe you're not hungry, but stopping to eat is one of those things that you do periodically, even though you're not necessarily feeling it. The reason why is because there are these big golden arches that happen to have the higher stature at every rest stop. I've been enjoying Waffle House lately, but that's a whole nother thing. Avoid McDonald's. Waffle House is king for me right now. It's been an absolute glorious experience, um, especially when there's no Buc-ee's to go to.
Well, there you go. There you go. So for a while there, my wife, I've been taking my wife up to Mayo, and I always stop at the Buc-ee's between Daytona Beach and Jacksonville so I can go and enjoy the Bucky experience. But yeah, I'm with you. Keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, no, you want to talk about well-paid employees. They've been doing something right over there.
Oh yeah.
So you see the golden arches. Now, in this chapter of the book, I walk the reader through all of the messaging that they will receive between the time that they think about stopping at a McDonald's to the time that they actually get their food. And all of this is an appeal to system one thinking. The world is moving faster and faster and faster. In order to survive, evolution is still a thing. We may not have, some people disagree about whether or not we come from apes or fish or amoeba, but the reality is that the beauty of who we are is we have the ability to adapt to changing environments. And one of the ways that we adapt to our rapidly changing digital environment is we make snap judgments a lot quicker. The speed at which a kid can flick through a TikTok feed and have some basis as to whether or not that meets a need or not, or hits their dopamine or not, is increasing at a rapid pace. And that's because we are training our system one thinking to make snap judgments over and over and over again. System one thinking appeals might include fear type messaging, in group bias, out group bias. There's all these different types of heuristics that can be applied. But the reality is the system one thinking is that thinking which we just sort of automatically do because we've ingrained it as a part of our processes. System two thinking is the type of thinking that requires reason. Imagine shutting your brain off and driving to work on autopilot versus having a tough time finding that house that you've never been to for the Christmas party the first time ever. That's the difference. System one thinking is easier for us. System two is more exhausting. Everybody appeals to our system one thinking because, as I've uncovered, Freud's nephew, I believe, took a lot of his research, packaged it up, and gave it to American marketers right after the war, around the 1950s. And a lot of that interesting stuff was ingrained into very tricky marketing practices that were used throughout the United States. They've effectively, as I say in the book, hacked our brain and sold it back to us at a discount. That's really what's happened here, and it's kind of dangerous to think about.
One of the challenges that you have in growing your practice, trying to make more money, trying to have a great life, is how do you stay focused and not frantic? It's a big challenge. So for a moment, I just want to talk to you about one of the tools that we recommend. It's transformative for anyone that adopts it and uses it. And it's called the My Great Life Focus. It is designed specifically by lawyers for lawyers. This is how it works. Inside of this is a focusing concept that helps you stay focused on the most important goals for you. It actually coaches you on things like prompts and questions, and it gives you an actionable plan how to achieve them. The goal here is for you to produce high impact results, not another ever-ending to-do list. You have to-do lists in your task management in your CRMs. You have to-do lists being flung at you. Really what you're trying to do is get focused and decide what are the most important things to you. And this tool is designed to help you gain better control over your time and focus, strike the balance between your work and personal life, help you elevate your marketing, help you build a more focused team and improve your strategic delegation. It helps you boost your cash flow and profitability while creating the life you enjoy. So I know we talked about this tool in other episodes. You've heard a lot of our members talk about this tool. Some of you are like going, oh my God, it's a paper planner. Yeah, it's paper. And there's a reason for it being paper, because I want you to step away from the screens. I want you to take a moment to make good decisions and decide what does a great week, a great day look like to you. So you can get the planner. I'm going to put a link in the show notes. You can get a subscription. If you're a member, it's included. So take advantage of the member. And if you start a subscription, I'm just going to tell you, it will change your life. I've been using it for 20 years and I just could not imagine my life without this particular tool. With that, I'm going to encourage you to get started building that great practice and great life by using the most foundational transformative tool, which is the My Great Life Focus. So that's perfect. That's perfect because the So I'll answer the question that you asked, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about that because it was about 2018, and I was, we have this tool that we call the My Great Life Focus. Is basically a combination between a planner and a journal. And I was working in that, and I noticed that I was agitated by an article, and I was suspicious, kind of like you, like a trial lawyer, because I did back in the day try some cases. And as a critical thinker, I'm like, I'm not buying into this factually. Like, it doesn't make sense to me factually. And then, did a little research on the article because it was irritating me a little bit. Like, it just bugged me. And then I was like, this is just, there's somewhere between news and propaganda that, 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 that this article fell into, and it was more propaganda than news. And I was like, okay, this is it. I'm done. And I just decided from that point forward that no more cable news, no more Wall Street Journal, no more New York Times, no more traditional media, whatever that means. And then I started using technology to curate, which puts me more into a fragmented class, but also arguably a less irritated class. And I start focusing more on what you would call systems two thinking, which was questioning, why do I need to know this information? Why is this information important to me? Why is this information relevant to me? Do I actually need to be fed? And I like the word diet. Do I actually need to be fed this information? Because it may not actually change anything. And this is where you can see people break down politically by what channels they watch, which shows what, who they follow, because then they fragment it into those narratives, and those narratives wrap in very significant truths, which is beliefs, right? Totally beliefs. So it was a decision for me. Part of it was defensive, part of it was thoughtful. I have no regret. I'll watch movies occasionally. You and I were talking about that. I'll watch movies occasionally. I read a lot, and I consume most of my news right now is curated, interestingly enough, by AI. So I use Perplexity a lot for curating news. I will use Google alerts for certain types of things I want to know. So I'm much more selective, and it's not so much I'm just selective about who gets my attention and why. And I know I'm getting played. You're talking about McDonald's. I'm like, well, that sounds good. Bucky sounds good. That sounds good. So I know I'm getting played a lot by system one thinking and, being hooked. But I'm trying to do a better job of choosing my reactions, choosing carefully about why I'm doing certain things, trying to stay in alignment with more my great life. So that was the decision. I don't recommend to anyone they change their habits. Like, everybody's got to look and say, does that work for me or does this work for you? My wife has followed suit with it. To a certain extent. I've talked to some of my friends about it, but I've never said you should go on a media diet. Like, you should. I think it's something that you got to choose for yourself how you want to respond to the world. That's why I like your book, because your book peels back and exposes uh, a lot. Like, it exposed a lot. You've used philosophy, psychology. So go ahead. I'm sorry to take
No,
you, but I want to answer the question and reinforce why I like the book and I like the direction you're going.
you said a very important word there, and that's fragmentation. I want to take a second to discuss the importance of that word in our common environment, especially as it relates to lawyers. For the first time in history, you will be facing jurors that do not know each other at all. It used to be the case that we had a tribal community, that religion, tribe, family, extended family, location would be able to tell you certain things about a person. When I experienced Afghan tribes in Afghanistan, as I was, roaming around the battlefield there, most people in a tribe shared a common system of beliefs and a common understanding. Well, our tribes are no longer based on geography, religion, or culture. Our tribes are based on what we're consuming. The messaging that somebody has curated for themselves through algorithms can be completely different than the messaging that their neighbor gets through the algorithms that they're getting. This is where we started to see the very early Facebook debates and why Cambridge Analytica, which I discuss in the book, was so powerful when they effectively changed the election. This wasn't election stealing. This was something that was completely legal to do, but it's unfortunate that it was able to happen in the first place because we let it happen. Cambridge Analytica determined that it takes about 5,000 data points on any individual in order to understand what they will likely do and consume. I talk about this in the book. As a result of that, they used the 65,000 data points that they can get on any individual who has a Facebook account because they can look at all your other apps too and figure out a lot about you. Then they can start targeting messaging to individuals about the election, about the products that they should buy, about the podcast that they should listen to. And they can curate your entire world and drive you deeper and deeper and deeper into a world without your consent that you now consume and believe because those are the walls of your glass house that has been created by the algorithms. This sounds dystopian and strange, but just take your YouTube feed, for example. Maybe you clicked on a video about Tim Ferriss, who I talk about in the book, because you think you like what Tim Ferriss has to say. But maybe Tim Ferriss's ad was placed a few times in your Facebook feed, or you were given a web page or something like that. And after the third or fourth time signaling it, you decide to look up a video. Now you're in that demographic. They recognize that you're probably a male between the age of 22 and 45, and you're interested in health and longevity. So they feed you Peter Attia, they feed you Jocko Willink, they feed you ice baths, they feed you the Wim Hof method. I mean, this is the stuff that I was getting targeted with. Next thing you know, you have turned into this person who feels that it's the most healthy thing for you to do to wake up, take a nice bath for 45 minutes, take 35 supplements, then journal in your custom journal that you've created, then go and hustle as hard as you can, starting as many businesses and doing 5 social media posts a day because they gave you Gary Vaynerchuk as well. And by the end of the day, you're completely exhausted. You haven't gone any further and you've practiced all these rituals, which cost you thousands of dollars. They've controlled your life by messaging and getting it to you. So fragmentation is what I started with. That's a fragmented subset of our culture. Your neighbor is getting something else. Now let's take this to the political realm. Let's say that they realize that you are the type of person, and this is a true story, Cambridge Analytica did this, based on your data points, you are a person who is prone to potential conspiracy theory thinking. You will get targeted with conspiracy theory messaging. Let's say you're a pretty stable individual, or maybe you're more emotional and compassionate. They will target you with that messaging as well. Neighbors then start fighting. The debates happen. People get entrenched into their own logic. And we deal with a society that doesn't know each other. That translates into a jury because you may have people sitting next to each other who do not even speak the same language, who can never agree on the same thing, and who aren't motivated by the same things. How do you speak to those people? You speak to those people through grand narratives that align everybody that everybody understands to. And that's really what we need to look to start with.
I agree with everything with the exception of one statement.
Yeah.
Glass house. I don't
Mm.
think those houses are glass. I think those are wooden chutes. I think they are solid, not transparent walls. I mean, once you kind of, like you said, get put in the chute and you have this incredible social media, and you have to understand part of the challenge is, at least for me, and you've done a lot more thinking about this, is you no longer are an individual, you're a product inside a social media platform. And you are a product. You are a product. They know what you want. They know what you want to buy. They know what you're thinking. I swear to you, while Apple says it's not true, if I have a conversation with my wife about something I'm thinking about buying or something I'm thinking about looking for, and my phone's near me, it freaks me out because the next thing I know is I open up Google and there's an ad for that thing. I'm like, okay, is Siri constantly on, listening to every conversation I have? How awful will this be when Siri, which is now being replaced by, I guess, a more upgraded ChatGPT, and I have a serious ChatGPT addiction, like serious. So how how will the illusion of freedom of choice craft my future when I think, I mean, it's like Matrix. It will totally craft my future based on a handful of ads I looked at, a handful of podcasts I might have been curious about, an exercise routine I may have downloaded. What will my future be crafted by? It won't be really crafted by choice. It'll be crafted by the illusion of choice, which is more or less arguably dictated maybe by a sophisticated algorithm, a very hopefully kind AI. And that's, I think, part of what your argument is. I mean, part of your kind of trying to ripping back the veil and having people look. Would you understand what is happening to you as a human being? Do you understand what's happening in your life?
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So, um, the is Siri hearing my conversations issue is much more scarier than what you think might be happening. The reality is that it's not listening to you. But although some people have claimed this, I don't believe it's true, and my research has suggested that it's not true. However, the scarier part about that is you were having the conversation with your wife because of the messaging you received,
Oh, that's fun. I like that. That's
and
good.
you continued to see the messaging. That's routinely what happens when this occurs. You see some subtle messaging, it appeals to your system one thinking, it does not process in your brain, and you don't store it, you don't remember it. And then you say, "Hey, honey, I'm dissatisfied with our vacuum. I think we should get a Dyson." And then a Dyson ad shows up. Why? Because that was your third or fourth message related to the Dyson, and the conversation happened to happen just as a result of your system one thinking. For that, we need to talk about the unconscious briefly and Carl Jung.
Ah, let's go. I love this. You open up part three of the book with
Yeah.
this great quote. So let's talk about it.
Yeah. Jump into the quote first, and then we can grab some Carl Jung real quick.
Yeah. So the quote is, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate."
That's right. That's right. That's right. For those who've never done any dream work before, I will tell you that I didn't think that it was an important thing. I thought that dreams were hocus pocus. I just thought that it was the random firings of our neurons. But of course, we know that nothing that we do is ever random, and nothing, and whether you're religious or not, nothing about this wonderful creation that is humanity is ever really by mistake. Um, there's reasons. And Carl Jung firmly believes that our dreams are the unconscious. And the idea here is that our unconscious does not speak using language. It's not developed that. It's very, very primal. It is the thing that existed in us before logic and reason has applied. And over years, we've layered more logic, communication, systems on top of our thinking, and we've become very logical people as a result of survival. But empirical logic was not our starting point. That was not the original state of man or woman. That was not, if you believe in the Garden of Eden, how we existed back then. We existed with a very strong unconscious, and that's why you see mystical beliefs being used more and more back in history. Hugh Grant, in this most recent movie, Heretic, I think it was, has a great explanation of this. It's a horror movie, but he kind of gets into it and it's beautiful. It's a very philosophical movie. So let's just understand that we have this river of unconscious, and it's there and it bubbles up. But because we don't know that we're getting a message from the unconscious, we don't recognize it as being our own thought process. Well, advertisers have found a way to speak to our unconscious. They've found a way to tell us that we have needs or drive fear and have messaging to that unconscious. And so we move forward and say, I need a Dyson. Oh, it's fate that this ad popped up. Or I'm moving in this direction. Oh, it's fate. Oh, look, it's synchronicity. I have manifested. We're seeing words bubble up in our lexicon that suggest these things. The reality is that this was the unconscious moving forward and thinking. So the first step in truth and persuasion is dealing with the media diet and understanding a lot of this signaling and starting to look at the world in a different way. The second step, and probably something better for a later book, is to do the self work, to have the conversation with your unconscious so that you can understand what drives you and you can start finding purpose. Purpose is not found in achieving the million things that our capitalist society tells us would be good for us. Purpose is found doing the work and establishing a relationship with our unconscious and understanding what truly drives us. And ironically, after doing all that work, the purpose that I have and the thing that fulfills me most any day, other than talking to Steve, is writing, figuring things out, free writing without thinking, emotionally writing. The first time in my entire life, about a year ago, I was able to cry while I was writing. And I'm saying that on a public podcast, literally cry. If an individual can feel that, you will feel a chill that runs up your spine and shows you that you are doing something that you're supposed to be doing. It's an incredibly healing and purpose driven process. I want everybody to experience that. And that's the reason why I spent, probably 1,000 hours putting this down in this book.
There's a lot there. And it's the core message, I think, that I've committed the mission of my life, and the core message of this little podcast is, what does a great life look like to you? The core message is cultivating, learning, uncovering that purpose, uncovering that passion that opens up for you. Now, there's two things I want to say about this. The first is, a couple of years ago, I did a presentation at our summit called Achievement versus Greatness. And I made the argument is achievement is when you're running somebody else's race and you're running that chute, that chute that somebody's created for you. You know, most people can get this elementary school, high school, college, but you're on a chute. And that works for some people. Like, okay, just tell me what to do. I can do that. I can totally do that. And they're kind of like a stallion, boom, running down that lane. And then, boom, they pop out. And now they're free ranging. They're in a pasture. And when they're in that pasture, they're like, okay, what do I do? What do I do? Where do I go? Where do I belong? What should happen? And so it's easy to kind of join a tribe, integrate into a particular narrative. The function of religion as an institution, the functions of education as an institution, the functions arguably of government as an institution. Um, Clearly, you can argue have eroded, or for better or worse, for better or worse. But people are kind of free ranging. And for some folks, free ranging is really, really uncomfortable. It's really scary because if you're free ranging, that means, we'll go back to Carl Jung, first and foremost, you are ultimately responsible for your life.
Yeah.
And you can't blame anybody. Like, if you're not where you want to be, you can't blame anybody. And for a lot of people, like, oh, hell no, I'm going to go back in the chute so I can blame, I got a good narrative. Those people are at fault for what's happening to me. And for some folks, that's a very comfortable blanket to wrap around and go back into that chute on. Other folks are like, okay, this is a little scary out here because I'm free ranging. Like, I'm having an existential crisis. I'm exploring. And I think that's why you framework so much interesting philosophy in the book. But I'm kind of lost out here. The second thing is journaling. And this is one of the reasons, we've created this particular tool and encourage our lawyers to, and our audience, to handwrite and journal and spend time, like you said, getting connected. And handwriting versus dictating versus typing connects, I think, 16 different neural pathways in the brain. So it is a critical element. So, it's really cool that you got to a place in your own reflection that you did cry and you connected with something, because that's a sign of healing. It's a sign of transformation, a sign of what's next for you. So what are your thoughts? I mean, I don't want to take you too far afield, but as I listen to you, and I'm trying to, it's one of the primary reasons I want you to get on the podcast so you can talk to people and say, hey, look, I want you to, as a very accomplished trial lawyer, as someone who's been a leader in the Marines, someone who's a leader in their field, look and listen and question, what is truth at this moment for you? And are you actually being persuaded? Are you being enrolled into a fragmented narrative and you're part of a product line?
That's a really good way to put it. And for that, we open up the book with a discussion of Reddit. For those people who don't know Reddit, this chapter is admittedly heavy and complicated. My father called me up. I have a lot of respect for him, but he said, "Hey, I had to read some of these pages twice, and I thought about editing it, and I just told myself, no, if people have to struggle through it, I it's unfortunate, but I think that they will still get something out of it, and I think that there's maybe the ability to reread it and continue to find new meaning behind it, which I hope for people." But Reddit is an amazing way to look at subcultures because on Reddit, you can create your own subculture overnight. And to the extent that people want to belong in it, you can get a pretty fanatical fan base. So I talk about this place called liminal spaces. It's ironically, the word liminal has been coming up a lot. If you search Google to see how often it's coming up a lot because people are feeling listless without purpose. That's why liminal exists. That's why I chose liminal spaces. It's the representation of I am somewhere, but I don't know where, and I don't know where to go. And that causes me panic. That's exactly what you were referring to earlier. So, liminal spaces is a very active forum because it's literally pictures of liminal spaces, an airport where you can't see an entrance or exit, but you just see a long hallway. Usually they're relatively dystopian. And people created a forum called Liminal Spaces. And I think this chapter is available for free for those who want to listen to it as well or read it. But people are attracted to these pictures because Carl Jung says we will have 1,000 conversations with ourselves over our entire life, and the reality is that we are attracted to the things that speak to the unconscious fears that we have. And some of the unconscious fears people have are the purposeless and listlessness. And so photos of liminal spaces are very attractive. That's why this forum blew up. Of course, nobody knows that who's on this forum. Well, the owners of the forum have created a definition of what's considered a liminal space. And I talk about a hypothetical in which somebody creates a definition of a liminal space and they tighten the definition quite a bit. They say a liminal space is a picture of a dystopian place where you can't see an entrance or an exit and it gives you the feeling of listlessness. But what you'll see happen in a society like that, a Reddit group, is that people who follow the rules in the best way will get the upvotes, and people who follow the rules in the worst way will get the downvotes. And liminal spaces that follow these rules will continue to be upvoted and get popularity. And so there's a contest that's created on how well we follow the rules that have been created. And sometimes these rules are unspoken. If somebody violates those rules, they will be ridiculed and downvoted, or they will be told to put their post somewhere else. And that's how these microcosms get created. Well, let's imagine that somebody gains some power in this system of the liminal spaces Reddit forum and becomes a user because they followed the rules. They're the pope of the liminal spaces forum. They've got some power and they decide to drop a bomb and change the definition of what liminal is. You will see a fracture of the community, maybe intentionally so, and people will split to their corners of what they believe would be the right liminal space. And you've seen that changing the truth subverts the power structure that has been created on this Reddit forum. That's a microcosm for what happens in our lives. And what Michael Foucault, French philosopher, really talks about when he says that truth is really a power structure. What our truth is really a representation of who won. Was capitalism right? Was communism right? Depends on who won and who controls the narrative. Is this doctrine in my version of Christianity correct? Depends on who wrote the doctrine and the conversations that happened. Truth is really a function of power. And to understand how to navigate in our arena, the first thing we have to do, the very, very first thing that we have to do, and why this is the first chapter, is that we have to understand that the truths that we've been historically told were really a function of the power systems that we aligned with. And we need to check in to see if we still align with those truths. And if not, we need to go and find our own definition of liminal spaces that speaks to us and our purpose and our unconscious to bring that hypothetical all the way around. That's the first step that we need to take.
Okay. So the first step, and I'm going to let's do some practical things.
Mhm.
Like if you're trying to coach someone through this practical things, and obviously we'll have in the show notes the book, social media contact for you, of course, got to be social media contacts, the ways to connect with you on this. And if someone's like, okay, you two nuts have, and talking about all kinds of things, what would be three practical things that they could do from this point to, if you could coach them through it, or to explore whether they may be caught in a power structure called truth, to unbundle their system one thinking, to look at what narratives might be controlling the shoot that they are, running in. What would your three practical piece of advice? Because you've done 1,000 hours worth of work on the book, you've done a lot of thinking. Just give me three practical tips.
Yes. First, I would say that the first part is looking in the mirror. It's understanding the truths that we believe that we've been told, the truths that we hold dear, and inspecting those to see where those may have been related to a system of power that we subscribe to. That's number one. Challenging the traditional narrative and making sure that we still believe in it. I'm not trying to say that if you are a religious person, you should reject your religion. I just think that we should understand the truths that drive us. Now, to bring a little bit more clarity to that, this is related to understanding the truths that drive us and control our lives, not inspecting every truth out there. We don't have time to do that. That would create a media diet that would be exhausting and impossible. So, another part of that, and I guess we could say maybe step two, but sort of next to it, is understanding exactly what truths we need to move forward with, what truths are important to us. Is that I want to talk to a jury in a better way. And so I need to understand how I am presenting information and what my truth is. Is that maybe I want to be a better parent? So I need to challenge the traditional way that I've approached parenting. Do what I say because I said so was my parenting mantra until I did this work. And now I realize that in the modern day, consent and buy in and understanding and love and compassion will allow every other parenting move and decision to be accepted much more readily than what I used to respond to when my father said, do something, you do it because that's precisely what you do. So that's challenging the narrative and understanding what truths we need. The second thing that we need to do, and this is really where your organization and podcast is tremendously helpful in this work, is to find out what drives us and what our true purpose is. And in many cases, that may mean rejecting or pretending that we don't need what we are currently doing. I am a lawyer. This is what I do, but is this my purpose? For that, I think I talked about this on the last show, but ikigai, a Japanese somewhat philosophy of finding your purpose, is very helpful. Many cultures have found this, some find it through meditation, but a lot of that is really the self work that you need to find out what drives you and what will give you more purpose. Then the third thing that I would say that we should really focus on, and this isn't the persuasion aspect. This is more of the self work and the truth aspect. I think that we really need to look at conforming or creating a world around us which facilitates that purpose, that truth, and being very careful about what we consume and what we observe to ensure that we're able to respect that. That might mean I'm going to start the first 2 hours of my day not looking at my phone because I want to ensure that I've created the runway for me to drive the train of my life. I am going to avoid the type of messaging that I would be exposed to that would send me in a different direction. Just to give you an example, wake up in the morning, you get an email from somebody. There's a comedian who does a sketch that's very funny. He picks up a wrong number, and the guy jumps on the phone and he's like, "Hey, did you see the new budget? It's now 10 and it was supposed to be 15." The guy plays along and he just repeats back, "It was 10 or it was 15 and now it's 10. What's going on here?" And he continues this call with this wrong number. It's fantastic. Um, but imagine you get an email like that. That drives your day. That person has just taken your day away from you, potentially bogged you down into this negotiation, this process. but was it really relevant to what you needed to do? So blocking out time, there's many methods to taking care of that, but consuming the diet that you need to get you forward. You've mentioned journaling. I think a voracious appetite for reading the books that you feel you want to read. Go into the bookstore and just feel what's in there and pick something up random, something that drives you, something that your unconscious pulls you to, and consume it. I've always felt that the time it takes, you could always pick up my book if you wanted to. The time it takes to write a book versus the time it takes to create a YouTube video or write an article with ChatGPT, I'm going to gravitate more towards authors who've taken the time to do those things as opposed to the quick clickbaity sound bites. Exist in a world where clickbait doesn't drive things to the top. Exist in a world where system two thinking, careful study, the type of thing that Carl Sagan, who I really love, I wrote a chapter about him in this book, the type of thing that Carl Sagan would say. I don't know if we're allowed to swear here, but he has something called the BS detector, the baloney detector, he called it, but it's been referred to as the BS detector as well. But consume things that are based on a process that is right and just and not existing clearly in a clickbait or capitalist stage. And just briefly, what Carl Sagan would say in his baloney detector is that in our lives, we've created systems and structures and processes to understand what the truth is. In the law, we have a judicial process. In science, we have a scientific process. We don't always say that that process is flawless, but it's a pretty good mechanism. Where people step outside of that process and choose to, we can say that they are not interested in uncovering or testing their truths. If we're going to believe articles about medicine, read peer reviewed articles. If we're going to believe articles about law, read the case law. I appear a lot on the news. I do not watch news to prepare for the news. I read the pleadings and I deliver a more robust presentation because I understand from a primary source what's going on. So, without going too long, structure a world in which your diet is of the right things and you will feel more fulfilled.
Beautiful. Now, as we close, what's your final words of wisdom, encouragement for people that are going to explore the definition of truth, explore what persuasion means? What's your final advice? It's your closing argument, counselor.
If it's easy, you're not doing it right. I will say that. This process, if you read this book, if you go through the process and you really try to follow it, this doesn't require you to buy things. This doesn't require ice baths and all that stuff. Those are a means to nowhere. This is mostly related to thought and careful study. And if it's easy, you're not doing it right. It's very hard. It's hard to shut out the world. It's hard to sit in silence. It's hard to take time to meditate. And the reason why it's so hard is because we've been so bombarded with things that make us feel seemingly feel good, but ultimately leave us empty in the end. It takes a lot longer to establish fulfillment in this way. It takes a lot more exercise of the brain and it takes washing a lot off. Um, I think for the closing argument, I will invoke the absolute genius of communication, Larry King. Absolute genius. Love the man. There's a chapter about him. And I think you'll find this chapter in the book, and not to spoil it, but one of the first things that, and this is where you can tell that somebody is very centered. Johnny Depp is as well. And I think he did a tremendous job in the trial. Larry King is a very similar individual. He started radio. He was given a job at a radio station. The guy finally said, boss said, "Hey, it's your big time to get on the air, Larry." His name wasn't Larry King at that time. I think he had a Jewish last name and it was very long and difficult to pronounce. And so the guy was like, "Hey, what's your name going to be?" I think he probably was from New York. I don't know. "What's your name going to be?" And Larry's like, "I don't know. I never thought about it." "Larry King." I think he gives him the name and Larry's like, "Okay." He's scared. This is something Jerry Spence would probably do as well. Larry's scared. Light turns on and there's a long moment of silence. And the next words created the person that has done 65,000 interviews and done it flawlessly. Dictators, criminals, mass murderers, all of the highest politicians in the entire world, He's gotten every single one of them to talk and talk truthfully and honestly. And a lot of people have cried through this, including Larry. He was honest. He said, I'm Larry King. That's not my real name. This is my first day on the air. I'm petrified, but I'm going to do my best. Just ask yourself, this is the test. Ask yourself, if I was about to stand up in front of that jury, or if I was about to jump on the radio, or if I was about to go and do that thing for the first time, if I would have enough of a relationship with myself and who I am as a person to open up without a mask in that environment, or if most likely I would have tried to pretend that I knew what I was doing, or I would have avoided doing it in the first place. If you wouldn't do what Larry King did and be honest with yourself, that's where you need to start. That honest, open, raw conversation with yourself that allows you to open up in that raw, honest way. And I say this somewhere in the book. People have compassion and empathy for genuine people. Johnny Depp. I drink a lot. I use drugs. It was a crazy marriage. They have zero compassion and empathy for pretenders. When they see your mask, they have no compassion and empathy for it. They don't trust it. Deep down inside, they don't trust it. So let's start like Larry King, be open and honest and raw and present ourselves to the world. And that's the first place we need to be.
Which is what you did today. So I want to thank you for being authentically you, being honest, being raw, exploring and opening up a very, very difficult conversation that I think you're uniquely qualified for as a trial lawyer, asking what is truth?
Yeah.
What is persuasion? How does it impact you? So our audience owes you a debt. I would recommend the book. It's a fascinating book. It is a hard read. It's a heavy lift. It's a fascinating lift, one that gives you a wonderful byproduct in the end, which is, what is the narrative that I'm being persuaded by? What is the conversation? And can I choose differently? Can I unpack what's going on? So thank you, Ron. Great work, great book, great job.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining this week's episode of Great Practice, Great Life. Please tune in weekly to get the next episode. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe, like, and don't hesitate to share it with a friend who you think this episode can help. With that, thanks, and I hope you enjoy next week's episode.